When I was little, all of the adults in my life asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and honestly, I wanted to be everything. A writer, an actress, a paleontologist, a violinist, but more than anything, I wanted to be at the adult table. See, that's where the answers were. All the adults in my family seemed to know everything, and I had no idea that they were making most of it up. My aunts and uncles, my parents and grandparents would sit around the table and just hurl information at each other in this heated debate to determine who knew the most about anything. The fastest route to get to Pennsylvania, when the leaves were going to change that fall, who really made the best lasagna. And in my family, where knowledge was traded like currency, my grandfather seemed like a very rich man. You see, my grandfather was the best kind of know-it-all. He would answer all of my completely unasked questions with a mixture of real and completely fabricated information. And he always shared it like he had this exciting breaking news. Hey, he'd say, hey, did you know the milk is at the back of the grocery store to make you buy more? Or, hey, did I ever tell you that the worst thing you can do for a television is turn it on and off? See, my grandfather loved knowing everything, and so he dabbled in everything, guitar, ham radio, but my favorite of his pursuits was amateur magic. Now, I'm sure most magicians do magic to see the joy and wonder on the faces of their audience. Not my grandfather. He did a show for the neighborhood kids, and I asked him, hey, how did it go? Oh, he said, I got them good. Yeah, I fooled them silly. When I was done with them, those kids didn't know which way was up. That's right, my grandfather did magic to fool small children, to show them that he had secret information no one else did, and the thing is, he was good. I mean, he showed me this trick where he took just a regular penny, put it on the table, covered it with a handkerchief, bam, hit the table, raised the handkerchief, and revealed a giant penny. Even at age 20, I was impressed. I was transformed into an adoring child, and he was my grandfather, king of the adult table. You know, when you're little and you think about what you're going to be when you grow up, there's things you don't consider. When you grow up, you get older, even old. And as the years passed, my grandfather's hand started to shake, and I could tell in his trembling grasp that all the cards were aces of spades. Hey, did you see how I did that? He asked me, suddenly self-conscious. No, I lied. How did you? I hated myself for lying, but I couldn't stop pretending that he was the man who knew everything, who could do anything. Eventually, my grandfather stopped doing magic. He got much older and much sicker. He was hospitalized, and I went to visit him with a huge stack of magazines. I thought he could read them, memorize the information, and spit it back at me. And as I went to put them on his bed, he raised a hand to stop me. I can't read these, he said. I just can't focus anymore. The next visit, my grandfather was much worse. He was barely able to speak, and we spent the first half of our time in near silence until finally he looked at me and whispered, sorry. For what? I was left wondering. For being a bad host? For aging? For dying? Don't worry about me, I said. I'm just happy to see you. Later, I got up to leave, and my grandfather said the first and only full sentence of the whole visit. Hey, he said, what's the weather like outside? My grandfather, the man who knew everything, didn't have the smallest information. He hadn't been outside in over a month, and for the first time, I had the answer to his question. It's cold outside, I said. Not as cold as yesterday, but it's cold. I love you, Pepe, I said as I turned and walked out of his hospital room, down the corridor, into the freezing cold parking lot, feeling very much like a grown-up. Thank you.
So I come from a weird background. So I am brown, obviously, and my parents are very white, and that's because I'm not their actual child. I'm adopted. Both of my sister and I are, and we're from Mexico, and my parents are not. So as a child growing up in Cambridge and later in Brookline, this wasn't really a thing with a capital T, you know? Like, at best, it was just sort of something nice to pull out of your pocket at your party. Like, oh yes, I am adopted. Yeah, thank you. I am very Cantabrigian, am I not? But it wasn't really a problem. And my parents always did a good job of trying to ingratiate my culture into my life and my education. I never felt like I was at a loss for resources, you know? Here's a book about Diego Rivera for your birthday, you know? Do you want to learn about the Aztecs this year? Here's another book, right? So, and I took that into my own education, and I started teaching myself too. But it wasn't until I got a little older that I realized the ramifications of being about 3 shades darker than the majority of the population. So my freshman year of high school, the first week of school, I walk in and one of the deans calls us all into the auditorium for an assembly. And she stands there and she says, "As of this moment, the United States of America is under siege." And we didn't understand what that meant. And we went through our classes and we heard things on the radio, we watched things on the TV about planes, and we heard lots of new words like terrorist and Al-Qaeda. And I went home with my best friend that day and we watched the towers fall. And we were all together in that moment. The next day, I'm walking home from school and I round the crest of the hill that I live on in Coolidge Corner, and there's this van that goes by me as I'm walking up the hill, and I don't think anything of it, it's just a van, and there are these guys that are pointing at me and gesturing, and I think, oh, that's weird, whatever, and I round the corner to my street where I live, and the van peels around, and it comes back up the hill, and it comes screaming up in front of me, and it stops, and 4 guys, can't be older than college age, maybe in their early 20s, jump out, and I can't see their faces anymore. I don't know if it's because I blocked it out, if they were just shadows, if they were just wearing ski masks or something, or if it was just the trauma of the situation, but I don't know who they are. I just know that they're white, and they have rifles, and they point them at me, and I freeze because I know I'm going to die. And they point the guns at me and they yell, "You fucking Arab, get the fuck out of my country!" And they shoot me. And I'm freezing. I'm frozen in this moment in time, but I'm physically frozen. And I realize it's water. They're super soakers. And they laugh and they jump in their car and they drive away. And then I said, "You idiots, I'm a Mexican!" But they were gone. And since then, I learned a lot about my history and what it means to be different, you know? It's the kind of experience that scars you, but I wear it now with a lot of reflection, like a Purple Heart. It's scars over, and you learn from it. See, people will constantly try and put you in a box because it helps us understand the world. When people ask you at a party, "Hey, what's your background?" No. Where's your family from? No, really. Makes you wince. But that's not the way they mean it. But what they really mean, what you really hear, is, how can I categorize you? Help me understand you because you're not like me. But I've learned, as I've gone through life, that there are always groups of outsiders. Just being in that space between gives you an identity. That makes you someone. You're going to find, if you haven't already, groups where you may feel like an outsider and groups where that identity of being an outsider gives you status. So just remember, the next time someone tries to pull that on you, you are more than a box that you check.
Okay, so this one time in Ecuador, I ended up on television talking about blowjobs. Because from 2007 until 2009, I served as a volunteer with the United States Peace Corps. And being a Peace Corps volunteer is really difficult because you're basically choosing to make yourself a foreigner for an extended period of time. So over that time, you start to do what any good foreigner does to make themselves feel more comfortable. You start to normalize the otherwise strange things that are going on around you. So when you climb up on a city bus and you find that the bus driver is blasting the radio, not wearing a t-shirt, and drinking a bottle of beer, you tell yourself, yes, this is totally normal and I'm safe here. Now, normally Peace Corps volunteers are not allowed to speak to the media, mostly because we're a bunch of culture shock 20-somethings, and so the American government doesn't exactly want us running around talking to foreign media outlets, but they made an exception for me because it was basically my job to speak to the media. I served as a volunteer in Guayaquil, Ecuador, which is the largest city in that country. And I worked in a neighborhood called Calle Ocho. So Calle Ocho was famous for two things: parties and people getting shot at those parties, which wasn't a very good reputation for them to be spreading to the rest of the city or the rest of the country. So this group of women within the neighborhood came together and they formed an organization with the mission of changing that image and bettering the lives of the people in that community, and I became part of that mission. It was basically my job to go out and get donations from wealthy donors and bring them back to the community and bring the media back with them, and bring positive attention so that we could show that there were really good, hardworking people working in Calle Ocho in addition to the people that sometimes shot other people at parties. So as we started to gain popularity and notoriety, we were eventually approached by an Ecuadorian talk show host, and she had an idea for a TV show called Palabra de Mujer. And the whole premise was that she would go around and interview women in different walks of life to show that there are parts of being a woman that transcend barriers like culture and class and wealth. So in one of the interviews, she's talking with this very wealthy group of Ecuadorian women, and they're in this beautiful manicured backyard. I mean, this was an Ecuador that was not the Ecuador that I was familiar with. And there's like a pool in the background, and they're sipping cocktails, and they look like totally comfortable and beautiful and poised. And then she came to Calle Ocho. There's nothing beautiful or comfortable about Calle Ocho. We gathered in the gated-in front yard of one of the community members, and it was dusty and dirty, and that day was just ridiculously hot. And so we're all completely feeling super foreign and uncomfortable as these huge camera lights are shining down on us, and they're asking really difficult questions. So I can remember when she asked about losing our virginity. I told her that when I was a teenager and I was ready to have sex for the first time, I went to my mother and I asked her to put me on the cakes. What I meant to say is I asked her to put me on the pill, but the Spanish word for pill and the Spanish word for pastry is very similar, so I just sort of got confused. So there I am on national television. But that's not even the most embarrassing thing that happened. And as a single woman in her 30s, I feel compelled to tell all the single men here that this is no longer a sentiment I believe. But the most embarrassing thing that I said was, when asked about oral sex, my answer was, no me gusta tener un pene en mi boca, pero lo hago. So in case you don't speak Spanish, that means I don't like having a penis in my mouth, but I'll do it. So what came after that is I started to get recognized. Like, I go to the post office, and the lady there's like, oh, I saw you on Palabra de Mujer. And then I'm at the grocery store, and these creepy old men are giving me this like winky smile. But then another volunteer came up to me, and she said that some women in her community also saw the show, and they started talking with her about sex and oral sex and safe sex, and it started this open dialogue that she'd been trying to create and wasn't able to have previously. So I definitely got in trouble with Peace Corps for doing this, but I don't regret it, because what I figured out during that interview was how to feel less foreign in my own skin as a woman, as an American in Ecuador, and I was teaching other women to do the same thing, to be more comfortable, more honest about who they really are. And if some brilliant American ever comes up with a magical pastry that can keep you from getting pregnant, I will know who inspired them.
So it was a Saturday afternoon, and I was out running errands. And on my list of errands included buying sneakers. I walked into an athletic shoe store and was immediately overwhelmed by the variety of shoes. Turns out you can buy sneakers for walking, running, hiking, basketball. I wanted sneakers for running errands. The other thing that surprised me was how busy the store was. It was packed. So, nobody was helping me, everyone was busy, so I stood and I decided, I watched the crowd. And I looked at everybody, and it occurred to me that to a person, everyone there was young. And then I looked, and everyone was athletic. They were wearing running clothes or yoga clothes. They were stretching. But I am neither young, nor am I athletic. So I stood. No clerk helped me. I waited. No idle customer chatted with me. No clerk indicated, "I'll be with you in a minute." I felt ignored. And finally, worse than feeling ignored, I felt invisible. So I roused myself from this state. And I went up to a clerk who was just chatting with some customers, no doubt bonding. And I said, "Can you help me, please?" And he proceeded to talk to me like a petulant teenager talking to his mother. He sneered at me and disdainfully said, "So what do you do for exercise?" I said, "I cook and read." It wasn't going well. And then, apparently in an effort to kind of salvage this transaction, he noted, "Hey, you have a scratch on your nose just like me." And he was right. We both had big scratches. And he said, "How'd you get your scratch?" And I didn't understand what was going on. Was he mocking me? Did he expect me to tell him that it was a football injury? Or did he assume I hurt myself folding laundry? So I decided to tell him the truth. The other night, I was out with my boyfriend, and it was one of those fabulous evenings where you spend the whole night just lusting after each other. And we were feeling so good and so happy, and we're on our way home, and we got to my place, and we couldn't even make it into my apartment. We ended up having sex in the back hall on the stairs. And I look at the clerk, and his eyes are big as saucers. He's beet red, he's miserable. So I continued. And just as I was about to climax, I grabbed him by his shoulders, and I pressed my face up against his chest, and the zipper on his jacket scratched my nose. So I stopped. I looked at the clerk. I stood straight and tall, and I said, "So, how'd you get your scratch?"
At 11 o'clock at night, Mr. Briley was going to be killed. At 9 o'clock, I was outside the state penitentiary in Richmond, Virginia, in a silent vigil with 50 people. Across the street was a much larger crowd. They were loud, having fun, drinking. I recall 3 of their chants: "Burn, baby, burn! Burn, baby, burn! Fry the coon! Fry the coon! Burn, nigger, burn! Burn, nigger, burn!" As vile as that was, there was one execution that I thought was worse, much worse. In the 1980s, I volunteered for an organization trying to halt executions. The director, Marie Deans, asked me to visit Morris Mason in the death house. Death row prisoners were sent there 30 days before their scheduled execution. Marie told me that Morris was mentally retarded and a paranoid schizophrenic. I went to the state pen, and a guard escorted me down to the death house. There was a big guard in front of the door. Inside, there were 2 more guards and 2 rows of cells. empty except for Morris on the third cell on the left. I knew that at the end of the row and around the corner was the electric chair. I asked if I could shake Morris's hand, and Morris said, "Yeah, you can shake my hand, come over, shake my hand." A guard nodded, so I went and shook his hand and sat down and started talking. It became very clear to me that this 30-year-old man had the mentality of a young child. One time, he was brought a spaghetti dinner piled high with meat sauce and said, "John, I can't eat all this. You help me, you help me." "Well, that's very nice of you, Morris, but I can't. I'm vegetarian." "What that mean?" "It means I don't eat meat." "This isn't meat. This is from a cow." "Yes, Morris, it is, but I don't eat cow." "It's okay, John. You can have some. I won't tell Marie." Another time, he got a letter from a woman who wanted to be his pen pal. "Write her back, John, write her back." "Well, I'll write it, Morris, but you have to tell me what to say." "I don't know what to say. You write it, you write it." I started reading the letter. "Dear Morris, how are you?" "How are you, Morris?" "I'm fine. Write that down, write that down." And that's basically how we composed the entire letter. Morris got a stay of execution and was sent back to death row. And over the next 9 months, that happened again and again. A new execution date, a stay, back and forth. But finally, his appeals ran out. On his last day, his attorney, the prison chaplain, and Marie were with him in the death house right up until the end. I stayed behind hoping for a call from the U.S. Supreme Court. It never came. But Morris called me to say goodbye. And while we were on the phone, I heard the warden ask him what he wanted for his last meal. "What that mean, Marie?" "Oh, Morris, you can have whatever you want for dinner tonight. Anything. Steak, lobster. I can have anything. Anything?" "Yes, Morris, what would you like?" "McDonald's! I want McDonald's!" And at that point, I lost it. But I wouldn't let Morris hear me cry because it was very important to him that he didn't cry. He wanted to go out like a man, especially because he was treated like a little boy all of his life. Morris ordered a feast from McDonald's to share with his supporters down in the death house, as well as the guards, including those who were going to escort him to the chair, strap him in, and pull the switch. Morris did go out like a man, a generous and forgiving man.
I moved to Korea to teach English on a bit of a whim, and about a week in, I hadn't started working, which probably should have been concerning to me, but it gave me a chance to explore Seoul and the new country that I was in, which was great until I got home and found that my locks had been changed. Then I got back down to the school and realized all my stuff was in garbage bags. And the owner said, "Actually, I don't have a job for you, but my friend does a couple of hours from here." And I watched as he loaded all of my stuff into the van. He slapped the GPS on the dashboard, he punched in an address, and he handed me the key. And he said, "Bring it back in 2 days." Dumbfounded, I didn't know what to do. What could I do? I got in the car and I drove. And now looking back on it, it was kind of hilarious, but in the moment, it was terrifying. I was 23, cruising down the Korean freeway, GPS barking Korean at me. And eventually, a couple hours later, I get to my new town and I meet my new boss, who shows me my new apartment, my much smaller, dingier apartment with these terrible exposed fluorescent lights that smelled like a basement. And I remember sitting on that twin bed feeling lonelier than I'd ever felt, wondering, what the hell am I doing here? But what do? You fall into new routines. I started my new job. I signed up for Taekwondo lessons. And about a month later, my dad came to visit, and I wanted to take him for this particular food called gamjutang, but I couldn't read Korean yet. And I stopped a stranger, and I asked her if she spoke English. She did, and she took us to a gamjutang restaurant. Her name was Okokon. And afterwards, she brought us to the Pig House, a restaurant that happened to be on my corner, and she introduced us to her friends, Byung-dong and Myung-ju Kim. The Kims didn't speak barely any English, but Okbun translated, and at the end of our visit, they asked if I would tutor their daughter, Yujin, who was 6 at the time. I agreed, and started tutoring her on these heated floors in the back of the restaurant, while Byung-dong, the husband, watched Korean soap operas. I started joining them afterwards for tea or pig, and eventually I started staying more frequently, and pretty soon it was taekwondo and then dinner and wine with the Kims. I was there every night. We started hanging out on the weekend. We took me hiking up, we piled into Byung-dong's car, and we would drive and go hiking in places that I would never have been able to reach. And I, in turn, took them into Seoul. They never really went into the city, and I showed them all the neighborhoods that I was discovering. I met their parents, their brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews. I joined them for Chuseok, the Korean Thanksgiving. We sang karaoke. We had long dinners. My Korean got a little better, their English got a little better, and I realized that in a few short months, I had gone from feeling lonelier than I'd ever felt to genuinely feeling part of a family. And this was different for me. My folks are divorced. They divorced when I was young. And this time with the Kims, it really felt like I was receiving therapy that I never knew I needed. And I felt my soul filling up. We had a lot of fun together, too. One night I witnessed the Kims have an argument through a phrase book. They were very eager to speak English, and Myung-ju grabbed the book and she's flipping through, and finally she comes with, "Talking to you is like talking to a brick wall." And Byung-dong grabs the book, having no idea what she said, and he's frantically flipping through. A full minute passes while he's finding the proper retaliation. And, you know, it was hilarious. Finally, his face got very contorted when he spoke English. He came back with, "You don't know what you're talking about." 7 months later, my time in Korea was coming to an end. And a month before, I told the Kims I'd be leaving. And a few days before I left, Myung-ju took me behind the counter of the Pig House. And she showed me a jar. It was full of money. They had started saving a little bit of money every day to come and visit me in America. So I arrived in this town lonelier than I'd ever been, and I left in the company of the Kims. I piled one more time into Byung-dong's car, and they drove me to the airport. And they waited at the gate, and they saw me off. They haven't visited me yet, but I visited them twice, and we talk frequently, and their daughter, Yujin, is now in high school, and they talk about her coming over to America to study abroad. And my wife and I have talked about it, and we're happy to host her. After all, that's what family's for.
MassMouth Inc., founded in 2008, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the art of storytelling. We promote storytelling at non-traditional venues through education, live performance, and digital media. For more information, visit massmouth.org or massmouth.ning.com.